Recording in
Hello and
progress.
welcome to the Cats and the Parrots. Am I frozen? Am I frozen already?
No, you're fine.
I'm good. Right, so everyone's invited has caused ripples in schools, almost oddly because it's always been in the Keeping Children Safe document, hasn't it? So it's always been there. But schools are being asked, what are you doing differently? So obviously, training is in full flow, and schools are looking at reviewing their policies. And a lot of the questions I get asked are, well, the first question I get asked is, what's the difference between banter, bullying, and peer-on-peer abuse? Come on then, Anne-Marie, what is the difference?
It's interesting you say that because they're all similar. They're all harmful sexual behaviours. And as you say that, when I was based in a school 22 years ago, even in residential social work, almost 29 years ago, there was some point where there's always been that a person who can manipulate another into doing or verbally whatever. I've seen it consistently through my career, even when my mother was a foster carer and I was a foster sister in that sense. So I've always known of the vulnerable, for even the person who's not initially vulnerable, but at that time being vulnerable in that space, you know. So social work, again, I've seen it in the sense of how silent it is. I
Yeah,
really want to be kind of, clear about that. It's a silent, you almost got the
yeah,
silent, the silent killer, in the sense of
yeah,
the person who's affected, who's been harmed. It's almost they're playing with the fact of, but what happened there, because they know the person, we know is peer on peer, and they might
yeah,
know the person, they know of the person. Age of 16, consent, questioning, was I,
yeah,
did I cooperate in that, did I
yeah,
consent?
yeah.
Yeah.
Is silence consent? Yeah,
So when I heard this year actually in this conversation, for me, I was glad from a sort of child protection practitioner level of actually seeing it on the other side of children talking about it sooner. And
yeah,
almost now we know with the new guidance that's coming out for KICSI 2021, we know that they're looking at expanding part 5. So we know that they're
yeah,
looking at, as a school, for September, you will have to think about providing training for staff about how to recognize signs and symptoms of harmful sexual behavior. And it's interesting, I thought of a few cases this week I had over my career, over the ones where it met the threshold of significant harm. And quite a few of them started in school, i.e.
yeah,
classrooms,
yeah.
and yeah, it was just interesting how we're in a place now where I believe we can be a bit more proactive after we clear up the backlog of
Yeah.
what's happened.
You talk about threshold. You've got the Brook traffic light system, which is what a lot of schools are using as their threshold.
You've gone out again and you might come back in here, silent wise. Keep talking, I'm sure you're going to come back. Are you going to come back? I'll say a bit until you come back, so keep talking, Kerry, and hopefully you'll come back. But I know in all what's happening now, we're also talking about boys being harmed by boys, boys being harmed by girls. So we need to be mindful of what it looks like with,
I've
harm.
got my school bell going in the background.
You're back
Can you hear
now.
me?
You're back
Put
now.
your
Yeah,
camera
keep
on, can you hear
talking.
me?
That's fine. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, I was saying about the Brook traffic light system, about how it's slightly an overwhelming document. So you were talking about thresholds, and we use that in our training.
Mm-hmm.
And the first few words are things like genitals and masturbation, which is quite shocking for staff. You're trying to explain it to them, but then when you start reading some of the other comments, they can identify with some of those. And it's almost like, I don't understand why it stops at 17. That's a different conversation. But I do feel it's a useful tool, but I think it's quite a shocking tool for training. I think that it slightly makes
There's another one
teachers.
that I use. Carleen Furman from University of Bedfordshire, who did the contextual safeguarding.
Yeah,
She also
yeah,
did a really good one. It was called Beyond Referrals.
yes. I use her
Really good
statistics.
paper,
Yeah,
yeah. And she's got the
yeah,
kind of appropriate to inappropriate to
yeah,
problematic, yeah, a sadistic in that sense, right? So I know with that one, when you're talking about it, I then bring up the categories of sexual abuse, and I bring up the masturbation, the rubbing, touching, indecent, pictures, etc. And some of those are appropriate to the age, in the sense of a
yeah,
person who. So I talk about it from that sense, then start talking about it at when does it become problematic, And that's when I get people to talk about, for example, when there's no consent or other people watching, whatever. And that's when people start to recognize, because some people argue, well, they're teenagers, they're exploring, let's experiment, rather than the person receiving it or the person who's manipulating another. And I was saying, when you kind of came off to come on again in that kind of distance of you kind of you're talking there in the silence when we couldn't hear you, I was just talking about boys in this. People are forgetting that we're talking about violence, sexual violence against children, full stop. I know it's against girls. We understand that because society, of course we know that. That's the first thing. But also remember the boys in it. So boys on boys, boys on girls, girls on boys, you know, girls on girls even. So we have to be mindful. And I have heard a few same-sex schools saying, but we've only got girls. Like, okay, but, you know, so we have to just let everyone know children are children. Every child's got the right to be protected, full stop. And again, thinking about the barriers of why children might not say, religion, culture, you know, honor-based abuse, all of those things where it could be demonized. But also we live in a very heterosexual world, don't we? Where for that boy who has been harmed by another boy, it's abuse, but society's telling him something else. So we just have to have that courageous conversation in all of this. Okay?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much for that.
No problem. Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right then. Bye.
See you later. Bye.